I woke up with a loud bang on our door. It was not a door knock, it was like somebody was knocking their head on the door. I could say it was a head because it was my sister banging her head on the door. I was not shocked as she usually sleepwalks, but this was different. I couldn't say what was happening. The bang grew louder and stronger. I saw her head hitting the door, but I can somehow feel that it was more like someone is actually holding her head and banging against the door, as if punching a hole through it. At this point, I was shocked. I called out to her in panic. I felt it. "Hey, stop that, Jenny." The banging continued. Then she stopped for a moment, looked at me, her eyes blood red. She asked in a whisper, "Why did you let me die, John? Why?" The whole house shook. For the first time, fear gripped my heart. It was not my sister's voice. It was someone else. "Jenny, you are alive. I wouldn't let you die." "What are you saying?" She fell to the ground. I ran to her and lifted her from the floor and lay her on the bed. I ran to the door to call my mom and dad. I opened the door and found my sister standing outside the door, blushing. "Jenny, what?" I looked back and the bed was empty. My legs gave up and I fell on the floor, unconscious. Chapter 2. Next day. Next day, I woke up in the hospital. I found that I was unconscious for 2 days. I saw my mom sitting next to me. She was scared, but she tried to comfort me. "Mom, what happened?" My mother was very afraid. She was almost crying. My dad patted on her shoulder. She left the room, and Dad answered, "Don't leave her," my mother corrected. Mrs. Morgan replied, "This woman writes to fiction." "Nothing, son. How do you feel?" "Gave us a shock there, champ." I don't really remember, Dad. I started explaining everything that happened last night. I saw Jenny banging her head on the door, Dad. I was scared, and she said that I let her die. I would never do that, Dad. She's my sister. How would I let her die? Also, the voice was not hers. It was like someone else spoke through her. After she fell, I picked her up and lay her on the bed, and I ran to get you and Mom. When I opened the door, she was on the other side of the door, Dad. I turned back to look at the bed and it was empty. After that, I don't remember anything. Dad, I'm scared. I am not sure if Jenny is all right. Where is she? Is she well? Bam, wait a minute, wow. His dad was listening to all in shock, but he didn't want to disturb when his son spoke. He asked one question. "Who's Jenny, son?" "Dad, this is not the time to playing games with me. I am in a hospital and you are saying you forgot your own daughter? Let me talk to the doctor and get you a bed next to me." I was laughing at him, but my dad's face clearly said he is not joking. "Dad, it's Jenny, my sister." Dad slowly spoke. "Son, you don't have a sister." I did not speak another word. I left the hospital 2 days later. Footnote: my father and I are more like school buddies, but I don't think I should talk about my sister to him. It seems they don't remember her. But my memory is clear. I have a little sister. She is Jenny. She is a small, cute, little, cuddly, sweet sister that anybody would want. Blonde hair, chubby cheeks. How is it that only I can remember her? Chapter 3. Father and the Son. We went to a church on the way back home. The pastor looked at me curiously. His name was Daniel. He took me to a separate room. He wanted me to tell him everything that happened the other night. I explained everything about non-existent Sister Jenny and the things that happened that night. So your sister, Jenny, when she was standing outside the door, what was her eye color? I was surprised. This pastor believes me. And not only that, he asked me a question about Jenny. I was happy. I do not exactly remember, sir, but I think it was normal and not red. Son, look, your mother and father does not think you are mad, but they think there is something unusual happening around you, and they are very concerned. You understand? Yes, sir. Good. Now, let's call your sister. What? I was surprised, but it felt like the pastor knows what he is doing. All right? I was sitting in a chair. The room was filled with crosses and there was holy water in bottles around me. There were 6 more pastors apart from Daniel. All 7 of them were standing around me. There was another chair right opposite me. Daniel came next to me and said in a soft voice, "Jenny, come out." A small figure of white came out of my body and stood next to me. I felt its hand on my shoulder. With all the things happening around, I was feeling comfort with the touch. It was Jenny's hand. Daniel started talking to Jenny. "Why are you back, Jenny, after all this time?" Colonel Keller asked. After barely 3 days of absence, Jenny suddenly arrived back in the present. "I have come to warn you. Something that lurks in the dark is out again." It was Jenny's voice. With that, everything went dark, and the sunlight alone pierced the room through a hole. The crosses on the wall started shaking. The walls seemed to vibrate. The holy water looked like it was boiling, and all 7 pastors were thrown away. Jenny was holding my shoulders stiffer. Someone or something got up out of the chair I was sitting in and walked straight to the opposite chair. It looked like Jenny, and the shape changed the very next second. It started to look at me with red eyes. The pastors returned to their position. "Ha ha! Nice to be back here." The sound rumbled across the room, and the figure took notice of Jenny. "Oh, Jenny, you are here. Why have you come?" "To save this little young man. You know how I like the taste of the pure souls." Then he looked around. "Oh, what are you all doing here? A welcome party for me?" laughed the voice again. Pastor Edward, one of the 6, shouted, "You have no place here, Gargoreth. Go back to the hole whence you came." "Edward, don't shout." With that, Pastor Edward mouth sealed and he couldn't speak. "Jenny made a deal with me. You can't simply ask me to go away. I am here to collect my fee, that's all." Daniel softly spoke out. "Gargoreth, the deal was broken was long ago and it's no longer valid. You have no right to claim him." "Oh, Daniel, you are still alive?" I did think I might have come back sooner. Anyway, I am not going back. Give me the boy," in a silky voice. This time Jenny spoke. "You can't have him. I won't let you." "Oh, Jenny, you developed courage because of the Almighty Lord standing behind you? Where is he now?" laughed the creature. "The deal is broken?" "Oh, Daniel, the deal clearly stated that I will be friends with everyone who is born as an only child in the bloodline. I just came to be friends with him." Jenny shouted, "I won't let you do it again. I won't let you fool me again. You can't have him." "Ah, ha! I feel itchy in my hand all of a sudden." Gargarath scratched his own hands. "Erge, no, arge!" "My hands! Father, help me, Jenny, it's burning!" I screamed. There were nail marks on my right hand. Amidst the scream, I heard his laughing voice, loud and clear. "If I leave, I am sure you know what happens, don't you?" Felter tap by felter, I turned to see a man standing over me. It felt like my whole body was on fire. like shattered glass pieces piercing through my body, as if my soul being ripped apart. On the side of my eyes, I saw Daniel walk forward and stood in front of me, blocking Gargarath's view on me. The pain reduced. Slowly, I felt Jenny's hands on me. There was no more pain. I turned my face toward her. Jenny stared up. "You think you can send me back? Daniel, you are not like your father." "I know that, Gargarath." "Now I must ask you to leave him and go away," Daniel shouted, and with holy water in his hands, shouting, "In the name of God, Father and the Son and all things holy." "Ha ha ha," laughed Gargarath. "You guys are still doing that?" "He won't come, my dearies. You have failed him. The human race has failed him. We are going to rule you. There will be no more of Father and the Son. There is no holy." Daniel was on his knees. "Father, I will give my life. I will give my soul. I will give everything for this boy's life. Please have my soul in trade for his. Please help me save him." The sunlight lit bright across the room. Gargarath's face shrunk. Daniel threw the bottle of holy water on Gargarath and said, "Our Father will always be there for who is willing, sacrifice his own soul for others. Now go back to the hellhole, you damned creature, and never return to earth." Gargarath's voice was not silky anymore. It was a squeal of a creature unheard on this earth. The entire room shook from his voice, and his last words were, "I will come back, my dearies." There was silence. I fell unconscious. The last thing I saw was Jenny's face. Oh. Chapter 4. Final. Jenny's story. I woke up back again in the hospital. Dad and Mom were sitting next to me. My mother was relieved to see me wake up. Daniel spoke first. "How do you feel, son?" "I am good, thank you, sir," I replied. "Sir?" "Yes?" I explained. "I can see Jenny in that chair in the corner. Can you see her too?" Daniel said, "Oh, don't worry, she came to check up on you." Then Daniel falls into the lost realm. I finally had chance to ask about Jenny. "Sir, why is it that I can see her, and she is not even real? I believed her to be my sister. What exactly happened?" Daniel started to explain the connection between me and Jenny. Jenny was born as a single child in her family. She lived in the year 1945. Since she was alone, she believed if she had a brother, she wouldn't be so lonely. Gargara was an evil demon that took advantage of her thoughts. Gargara made a deal to be friends with her and whoever is born as a single child in her bloodline. Gargarath took a form of an elder brother, visible only to Jenny's eyes. Jenny started to think Gargarath as her brother. "The form it took was yours, John." "You're welcome." Somehow, Jenny felt the connection to you, to your soul, though you were not born. She was living with you, though it was Gargarath's feeding of her soul and life. Some part of you was there with her. You hinted her that Gargarath was evil. Soon, Jenny was found dead in her room in an unimaginable way. My father came to know about Jenny's death and visited the house and felt the unease feeling. Jenny was not lost. She was still there, trying to reach out to someone, screaming for help. My father fought with Gargarath and saved her soul and died in the effort. Gargarath waited for the next child in the bloodline, and somehow it was you. It was that connection why you felt you had a sister all of a sudden. And Gargarath tried to take advantage of the same connection this time. Immediately came to recognize the name, Jenny, and your name was John. Daniel completed the story. I felt bad for Jenny. She is my sister, whether or not she is alive. I felt the connection more than ever. I wanted to speak to her and turned to look at the chair, but she was gone. I couldn't see her anymore. Da-da-da-da-da, Johnny called out, the countdown clock. Da-da-da-da-da-da. But I am sure she is with me. Her brother and I will be there for her if she ever feels lonely. I was crying when Mummy came to tuck me in for the night. Come on, Jamie, my love, dry those tears away. And please, let's not have any more of that silly nonsense about monsters in your wardrobe again tonight, she whispered, stroking my cheek. You know how cross Bill gets about it. Bill, my stepfather, a horrid man, always shouting at me for one thing or another. How I wish he and Mummy had never met. It was only since he had come to live with us that the scary noises had begun. But they are real, Mummy, I swear to you. I hear them. She sighed and stood up, padded over to the wardrobe and opened the door, revealing a small closet packed with my clothes on hangers, which she shuffled from side to side. Please, sweetheart, only your clothes in here. There's nothing at all to be frightened of now, is there? I swallowed as hard as I could and managed a tiny little shake of my head. Bill stood watching at the door. He narrowed his eyes, giving me one of his mean sideways looks, and told me that if I disturbed them again that night, I would have to stay inside my room the whole of the following day. Mummy was watching me, so she didn't see the expression in his eyes. He never does it when she's looking. She smiled, kissed me again, and walked over to him. Look, we'll leave your nightlight on for you, my darling, she said. Good night now. It was my shivering that woke me. It was exactly 3 o'clock. I am sure of that because I heard our grandfather clock in the hall downstairs chime 3 times. I was ice cold. My duvet had tumbled to the floor and my fingers and toes felt numb. Outside it was ever so windy and raindrops were hammering against the window pane. It was my sunshiny wonders at the presence of my cousin Molly. That night, though, I couldn't see him at all. The clouds were hiding him from me. I reached down for my duvet and wrapped it around me, blowing on my fingers to warm them up. That's when I heard it, the rattling of someone fiddling with the wardrobe doorknob. I longed to shout for Mummy, but I knew Bill would be angry if I disturbed them. Instead, I slowly pulled the pillow over my head and tried my best not to listen. But it was no use. Then came a familiar sound. My wardrobe door always creaked when you opened it slowly. I could tell that it was edging open, little by little. You couldn't mistake those short, staccato creaks as the door jerked. It had to be the monster, and tonight it was coming out to get me. Normally, it stayed inside the wardrobe. My heart began hammering in my ears so loudly I remember being terrified that it would hear. Curling myself into a ball as tightly as I possibly could, I squeezed my eyes shut and bit down on my lip to stop myself from crying out loud. I remember tasting the blood as it trickled into my mouth, but I still didn't dare move an inch. Eventually, the door stopped moving, and I heard a shuffling of something brushing against wood. Peeping through my fingers, I was just about able to make out a human shape in the dim glow of my nightlight. A smallish figure was standing at the bottom of my bed, staring at me. I could hardly believe it. The monster was no bigger than me, but the thing was, it was pure evil, I just knew. I think that was when I wet the bed in terror. I couldn't help myself, but I couldn't let it know. I remember the sensation of warm liquid spreading down my legs and hoping that if I simply refused to budge, the horrid monster might not find out. Maybe if I recited the Lord's Prayer to myself, it would go away and leave me alone. It stayed there, watching me for ages, whilst I prayed with all my heart for it not to hurt me. Eventually it hissed, "It's time." Then it stomped over to my door, cracked it open, and slipped out onto the landing. When I heard it knocking on my parents' bedroom door, I almost had heart failure. My stepfather would be furious. It hammered on the door again, and then I heard Bill groan and ask in his cross voice, "What the hell I thought I was up to?" Suddenly, their bedroom door crashed open and slammed against the wall. What I heard in the next few seconds were the worst sounds I had ever heard in my entire life. First, there was a scuffling, and I heard Bill swear out loud. After that, there were lots of heavy crashes, followed by a kind of gurgling and a piercing shriek that sounded like Mummy's voice. Afterwards, I heard her screaming and screaming. There were more bangs, then a few resounding thuds and weird moaning noises, and still the screaming didn't stop. What could I do? I wanted to run and help Mummy, but how could I? Paralyzed by fear, I jammed my fingers hard into my ears to block out her screams. After what seemed like ages, there was silence. Utter silence, not a sound. I tell you, that deafening silence was 10 times worse than the screaming. I then watched, horrified and open-mouthed, as the monster crept stealthily past my bed without so much as a single glance in my direction, wrenched the wardrobe door open and stepped inside. It wasn't until it had pulled the door firmly shut with a click that I felt able to move. My pajama bottoms were still soaking wet, and now they felt yucky and cold, but I didn't even care. I jumped up and shot out of my room to see what the monster had done. It had hurt Mummy, I was certain. I had to help her. I spotted Bill first. He lay sprawled face down in the entrance to their bedroom. I didn't care two hoots about Bill, but where was Mummy? I needed to find Mummy. I leapt over the motionless form that had been my stepfather and slipped to my knees in a dark red, sticky puddle of gooey stuff, slowly expanding across the parquet from underneath his head. It was gross. I wiped my hands clean on my pajamas as I struggled to my feet and gazed around. The room looked like a scene from one of those scary murder movies Bill liked to watch on the TV. There she was. My dear mother was slumped sideways, half in, half out of the bed. Her frilly white nightdress was crimson. Her beautiful hazel eyes were wide open, still full of shock. Her mouth gaping in a now silent scream. A huge kitchen knife protruded from her throat. I recognized it. It was the sharp, shiny one from the back of the kitchen drawer, the one Bill always used to carve the lamb on Sundays. As gently as I could, I gripped the smooth brown handle of the knife and tried to lever it out of her poor, lifeless body, but it was ever so difficult to do. When it finally came free, there was an awful slurping noise and more blood trickled down her neck. I fell backwards and let the knife drop to the floor. The coppery smell of all that blood was suddenly overpowering. I think that must have been when I began to scream. I was still screaming when the police broke down the door, having been alerted by Mr. Wilson, our next-door neighbor. I very quickly learned that just like Mummy and Bill, they didn't believe there was anything or anybody in the wardrobe. Even to this day, nobody believes a word of what I say. Probably because they feel safer from a clear consciousness. My dear cat. It has become unbearably hot in this room. I start to feel skittish and wipe my sweaty palms up and down my jumpsuit legs to prevent my knees from jiggling up and down. It is made of scratchy nylon material, horrid orange color, too. My jaw clenches tight. "Why doesn't anybody believe me, doctor?" I whisper through gritted teeth. "That's all I can remember. I swear to God, I have not invented anything. It is honestly what happened on the night my mother and that man were killed." My hands ball themselves into fists. I have learned this is not considered good behavior, however, so I force myself to uncurl them finger by finger and carefully place both my rigid hands, palm down and fingers outstretched, on my lap. Tears are flowing, dripping from my chin to my chest. I let them fall, but they begin to cause the cloth to become clammy, and it sticks to my chest. Feels like blood. God, I can't stand it. My left eye twitches and I begin to rock back and forth. My throat is dry. I feel myself slipping. I swear I'm falling. And then, all at once, a silver drop emerges from my blue eye, falls to the floor. Dr. Simpson is staring at me. "All right, James, I think that is more than enough for today," he says, removing his spectacles and placing them with his pen and pad on the small table at his side. "You've done well. This is fine progress we have made this afternoon. I believe our sessions are finally getting somewhere." He then smiles and reaches for my hand. I'm sweating, shaking, still sobbing. "Intrigued about you." He hands me a small plastic cup and presses a button on his pager. "Here you go now, take your meds. Look, the nurse is here to escort you back to your ward. I'll see you for our next session, same time next week." Once there was a girl named Maya who had a fascination for abandoned places. She had heard about an old abandoned house on the outskirts of town that was said to be haunted. Maya was intrigued and decided to visit the house. One day she packed a bag with some essentials and set off towards the house. As she approached the house, she could feel a chill run down her spine. She pushed her fear aside and entered the house. The inside of the house was covered in dust and cobwebs. The floorboards creaked with every step she took. Maya was thrilled to explore this abandoned house, but as she climbed the stairs, she suddenly felt a cold breeze brush past her face. Maya turned around to see that the door behind her had closed shut. She tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. She was trapped inside. End of section 27. As she looked around, she realized that the house was not as empty as she thought. There was a strange presence in the house, and she could hear whispers and footsteps coming from upstairs. Maya's heart began to race as she knew she was not alone in the house. She tried to call for help, but her phone had no signal. Her only option was to explore the house and find a way out. As she made her way upstairs, the whispers grew louder. The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to move on their own. Suddenly, a hand reached out and grabbed her ankle, pulling her to the ground. Maya screamed in terror as she saw a ghostly figure standing over her. The ghostly figure was the owner of the house, who had died many years ago. It was said that she was murdered in the house and that her spirit still haunted the place. Maya tried to run, but the ghostly figure kept appearing in front of her, blocking her path. She was trapped, with no way out. Maya was never seen again, and the abandoned house remained a place of horror and terror for anyone who dared to enter. Years later, some people claim to have heard screams and whispers coming from the abandoned house. Some even claimed to have seen a ghostly figure lurking in the shadows, waiting to trap its next victim. The legend of Maya's disappearance and the haunted house on the outskirts of town lived on for generations, scaring anyone who dared to venture there. Several years after Maya's disappearance, a group of teenagers dared to enter the abandoned house on the outskirts of town. As they entered the house, they noticed a strange presence and heard whispers coming from the upper floor. As they climbed the stairs, they discovered a locked room, and they found a girl huddled in the corner. She was dirty, malnourished, and appeared to be in a state of shock. The teenagers immediately contacted the authorities, who took the girl to the hospital. The girl had no identification, and she didn't speak a single word. She was in such a traumatized state that it was impossible to determine who she was or what had happened. Over time, the girl slowly began to recover. She was eventually able to communicate with the hospital staff, but she couldn't remember anything about her past. She had no recollection of her name or where she came from. The hospital staff named her Maya after the girl who had disappeared several years ago. The discovery of Maya inside the abandoned house shook the town to its core. Everyone wondered how she had managed to survive inside the abandoned house for so long. After Maya was discovered inside the abandoned house, she was taken to the hospital for medical treatment and psychological evaluation. The doctors found her to be malnourished and in a state of shock, and they immediately started her on a course of treatment to help her recover physically and mentally. During her stay in the hospital, Maya began to have frequent nightmares and panic attacks. She would often wake up in the middle of the night screaming and shaking with fear. She was unable to explain what was causing her fear, and the doctors could not understand why she was having these episodes. As the days went by, the doctors began to suspect that Maya had experienced some kind of trauma or abuse during her time in the abandoned house. They decided to bring in a therapist to work with Maya to help her work through her fears and traumas. Through therapy, Maya began to open up about her experiences inside the abandoned house. She revealed that she had been haunted by the ghostly figure of the previous owner who had been murdered in the house. Maya had seen the ghostly figure on several occasions, and it had been the cause of her nightmares and panic attacks. The therapist worked with Maya to help her confront her fears and to process her trauma. Over time, Maya began to feel more in control of her emotions, and her fear began to subside. The doctors eventually cleared Maya to leave the hospital, but she was still haunted by her experiences in the abandoned house. She knew that she needed to confront her fears and find a way to move on with her life. With the help of her therapist and the support of her friends and family, Maya slowly began to rebuild her life. Though she would never forget what had happened to her in the abandoned house, she was determined not to let it define her. What was haunting Maya inside the abandoned house was the ghostly figure of the previous owner, who had been murdered in the house. Maya had seen the ghostly figure on several occasions, and it had been the cause of her nightmares and panic attacks. The ghost of the previous owner was a malevolent spirit that seemed to have a hold over the house. Maya felt like the spirit was following her everywhere she went, and it was constantly trying to make contact with her. The ghostly figure would appear to Maya as a shadowy figure, lurking in the corners of the house or following her around as she explored the rooms. Maya could feel the presence of the ghostly figure even when she couldn't see it, and it made her feel constantly on edge. As Maya worked through her trauma with the help of her therapist, she realized that the ghostly figure was a manifestation of her own fears and anxieties. The figure represented the trauma that she Dee experienced, and it was a physical manifestation of the emotional pain that she had been carrying with her for so long. With the help of therapy, Maya was able to confront her fears and to process her trauma. She was able to recognize that the ghostly figure was not a real entity, but rather a product of her own fears and anxieties. By understanding this, she was able to move past her trauma and to begin the healing procedure. As the investigation continued, it was discovered that Maya had been trapped inside the house after the door had locked behind her. She had been wandering around the house for days, unable to find a way out. Eventually, she became weak and delirious, and she fell into a coma-like state. She had been in that state for several years until the group of teenagers discovered her. Exercise. Maya managed to survive inside the abandoned house by using her wits and instincts. When she first found herself inside the house, she was scared and disoriented, but she quickly realized that she needed to stay calm and find a way out. She searched the house for any signs of life, but it was completely empty. She also looked for food and water, but found none. She managed to find a few bottles of water that had been left behind, and she rationed them carefully to make them last as long as possible. Maya also tried to find a way to escape from the house. She searched for doors or windows that were unlocked, but everything was sealed shut. Eventually, she found a small crawl space in the attic that led to the outside. She was able to squeeze through the space and make her way to safety. Once she was outside, Maya was able to flag down a passing car and get help. She was taken to the hospital for treatment, and she began the long process of recovering from her ordeal. Maya's survival was a testament to her strength and resilience. Despite the terrifying circumstances that she found herself in, she was able to keep her wits about her and find a way to stay alive. Her experience also taught her the importance of staying calm under pressure and relying on her own instincts and abilities to survive. Maya's miraculous survival and recovery made her a celebrity in the town. She became a symbol of hope and inspiration for everyone who had lost someone or something in their lives. With the death of her husband and 2 daughters, she found the strength to continue fighting on. The town came together to support Maya, and over time, she was able to remember bits and pieces of her past. Though she never fully regained her memory, she was grateful to be alive and surrounded by the people who loved her. Several years after Maya's disappearance, a group of teenagers dared to enter the abandoned house on the outskirts of town. As they entered the house, they noticed a strange presence and heard whispers coming from the upper floor. As they climbed the stairs, they discovered a locked room. Inside the room, they found a girl huddled in the corner. She was dirty, malnourished, and appeared to be in a state of shock. The teenagers immediately contacted the authorities, who took the girl to the hospital. The girl had no identification, and she didn't speak a single word. She was in such a traumatized state that it was impossible to determine who she was or what had happened to her. Over time, the girl slowly began to recover. She was eventually able to communicate with the hospital's staff, but she couldn't remember anything about her past. She had no recollection of her name or where she came from. The hospital staff named her Maya after the girl who had disappeared several years ago. The discovery of Maya inside the abandoned house shook the town to its core. Everyone wondered how she had managed to survive inside the abandoned house for so long. As the investigation continued, it was discovered that Maya had been trapped inside the house after the door had locked behind her. She had been wandering around the house for days, unable to find a way out. Eventually, she became weak and delirious, and she fell into a coma-like state. She had been in that state for several years until the group of teenagers discovered her. Maya's miraculous survival and recovery made her a celebrity in the town. She became a symbol of hope and inspiration for everyone who had lost someone or something in their lives. The town came together to support Maya, and over time, she was able to remember bits and pieces of her past. Though she never fully regained her memory, she was grateful to be alive and surrounded by the people who loved her. Maya's incredible survival and the discovery of her inside the abandoned house remained a mystery to the town, but it also brought the community closer together. The abandoned house was eventually torn down, and a park was built in its place as a symbol of hope and rebirth. After Maya was released from the hospital, she faced a long road to recovery. She was physically weak and emotionally fragile, and she struggled to come to terms with the trauma that she had experienced. Maya received ongoing support from her therapist, who helped her work through her emotions and provided her with coping strategies to deal with her anxiety and panic attacks. Maya also received a lot of support from her family and friends. They helped her with everyday tasks, such as cooking and cleaning, and provided her with a safe and supportive environment in which to heal. As time passed, Maya began to feel more like herself again. She started to take on more responsibility for her own care, and she even started to volunteer at a local mental health clinic, where she helped other survivors of trauma work through their emotions and find a path to recovery. Maya's experience also inspired her to become an advocate for mental health awareness and support. She shared her story with others, hoping to help them understand the importance of seeking help when dealing with trauma and anxiety. Maya's incredible survival and the discovery of her inside the abandoned house remained a mystery to the town, but it also brought the community closer together. The abandoned house was eventually torn down, and a park was built in its place as a symbol of hope and rebirth.